Ukraine's military rang in 2023 by shooting down dozens of Iranian attack drones fired by Russia and killing dozens of Russian soldiers in a rocket strike on a vocational school in the occupied city of Makiyivka, in Donetsk province. Russia's military acknowledged the Makiyivka strike, saying 4 precision rockets fired from a US-provided HIMARS system left 89 soldiers dead, including a deputy regimental commander. Ukraine and Russian war correspondents said hundreds of Russian troops were killed. Combined with 2 more artillery strikes on towns in Kherson and Zaporizhia regions, Ukraine claims it killed or wounded about 1,200 Russian troops since Sunday, The New York Times reported Wednesday. Ukraine's use of HIMARS, howitzers, and other long-range artillery on Russian barracks and other clusters of troops marks a shift in strategy, fueled by Russia's blunders, military analysts say. Previously, Ukraine's artillery mainly targeted ammunition depots and supply lines. Meanwhile, the US and its Western allies continue to provide Ukraine with more advanced armaments. On Wednesday, President Biden confirmed the US is leaning toward sending over Bradley fighting vehicles, and French President Emmanuel Macron told Ukraine it's donating AMX-10 armored vehicles. Kirilo Budanov, Ukraine's head of military intelligence, told ABC News that Kyiv is expecting the US Bradleys. Ukraine dismissed as a trick a unilateral order by Russia for a 36-hour ceasefire starting on Friday, and the leaders of the United States and Germany said they were sending armored fighting vehicles in a boost for the Kyiv government. The U.S. weapons package, to be announced on Friday, is expected to include about 50 Bradley fighting vehicles as part of security assistance totaling about $2.8 billion, U.S. officials said. Germany would provide Marder infantry fighting vehicles, according to a joint statement on Thursday from Biden and Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky rejected out of hand a Russian order for a truce over Russian Orthodox Christmas starting at noon on Friday and ending at midnight on Saturday. He said it was a trick to halt the progress of Ukraine's forces in the eastern Donbass region and bring in more of Moscow's forces. In a phone call with Zelensky on Thursday, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan said his government was ready to take on mediation and moderation duties to secure a lasting peace between Russia and Ukraine. In an update on Thursday, the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office said that at least 452 children have been killed and 877 children injured in the conflict. Ukraine says Russia has lost thousands of troops despite seizing scant ground in months of futile waves of assaults on Bakhmut. The United States is of the view that Putin's ally Yevgeny Prigozhin, the founder of a powerful mercenary group, wants to take control of salt and gypsum from mines near Bakhmut, a White House official said. Russian President Vladimir Putin on Thursday ordered Moscow's armed forces to observe a 36-hour ceasefire in Ukraine this weekend for the Russian Orthodox Christmas holiday, the first such sweeping truce move in the nearly 11-month-old war. Putin did not appear to make his ceasefire order conditional on a Ukrainian agreement to follow suit, and it wasn't clear whether hostilities would actually halt on the 1,100-kilometer, 684-mile, front line. Ukrainian officials have previously dismissed Russian peace moves as playing for time to regroup their forces and prepare for additional attacks. Putin acted at the suggestion of the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill, who proposed a truce from noon Friday through midnight Saturday, local time. The Russian Orthodox Church, which uses the ancient Julian calendar, celebrates Christmas on January 7th, later than the Gregorian calendar, although some Christians in Ukraine also mark the holiday on that date. Kirilo Tymoshenko, deputy head of the Ukrainian presidential office, said Thursday at least 5 civilians were killed and 8 wounded across the country by Russian shelling in the previous 24 hours. The ongoing intense battle for the eastern city of Bakhmut has left 60% of the city in ruins, Donetsk Governor Pavlo Kyrylenko said Thursday. Ukrainian defenders were holding the Russians back, but the Kremlin's forces have pummeled the city with months of relentless shelling. Over the holiday period, a pedal-powered Christmas tree became the symbol of Ukraine's defiant resistance against Russia's relentless bombing campaign, which Vladimir Putin hoped would spoil everyone's Yuletide. Usually the Orthodox Church would celebrate Christmas on January 7th, but a decision was made by the Ukraine Church to give its parishes the option to mark the festival on December 25th, as a way of breaking from the Russian Orthodox Church, which has been a vocal supporter of Putin's war from the beginning. The visit by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to Washington in December yielded a pledge of an additional $1.85 billion, £1.5 billion, in security assistance, including, significantly, American Patriot air defense systems, which will give Kyiv the capability to strike targets inside Russia if it chooses. Meanwhile, a missile strike against Russian troop concentration area in Makiivka, close to Donetsk in eastern Ukraine on New Year's Day, is reported to have dealt another severe blow to Russian military morale. If that was indeed a Kremlin war aim, it has misfired dramatically. Kristen M. Baki, a professor of international relations at University College London, and a team of academics from the US and UK have been taking opinion surveys in Ukraine for some years and have monitored people's views towards the West in general and NATO in particular. Between 2019 and October 2022, Baki writes, there has been a massive swing in the number of people in Ukraine who identify with the West, while support for joining NATO has risen from 44% to 77%, the highest level ever recorded. And, while in 2019 the majority of people favored Ukrainian neutrality, this situation has been reversed by 8 months of conflict. These trends are most strongly reflected in the views of respondents between the ages of 18 and 30, more than 70% of whom disagreed with the statement that it would be best for our country's security to be neutral and stay out of military alliances. Meanwhile, what appears to be a deliberate attempt by Russia to target Ukrainian schools will also do nothing to win the hearts and minds of the country's young people. As Katia Calcio, an expert in education at Wesleyan University in the US, writes, more than 2,500 schools have been damaged by artillery during the war. Ukraine's forces launched 20 attacks on the areas of concentration of Russian troops in the past 24 hours, according to the General Staff of Ukraine's Armed Forces. In their January 5 update, the General Staff also reported that the Russian army launched at least 3 missiles, 13 airstrikes and over 60 MLRS attacks against Ukraine targeting civilian infrastructure in Bakhmut, Konstantinivka, Kurakhove, Nikopol and Kherson. Ukrainian forces also downed Russian Su-25 aircraft, Ka-52 helicopter, and an Orlan-10 type drone and repelled Russian attacks near 16 settlements in Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts over the same reporting period. The US and Germany will send armored vehicles to Ukraine, President Joe Biden and Chancellor Olaf Scholz said in a joint statement, providing a significant upgrade in firepower urgently sought by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Germany also will follow the US in providing a Patriot missile defense system to Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered his forces to cease fighting in Ukraine for 36 hours starting Friday at noon, Moscow time, but Zelensky and US President Joe Biden dismissed the move as a ploy, unlikely to slow a conflict well into its 11th month. The Kremlin said Putin gave the order ahead of Russian Orthodox Christmas. Russian forces continued their assault on the eastern city of Bakhmut, shelling more than 60 settlements in the area, according to Ukraine's General Staff. Russians shelled targets in the southern Zaporizhia region more than 100 times in 24 hours, killing at least 2 and wounding 3, Governor Alexander Starik said. Another 45 settlements came under attack in Zaporizhia and Kherson. The Ukrainian president joined allies in the West in ridiculing Putin's ceasefire announcement. In a tweet, he praised Germany's decision to send armored fighting vehicles and a Patriot missile defense system, saying that Germany is making a crucial contribution in intercepting of all Russia's missiles. The US will provide Ukraine with its Bradley fighting vehicles while Germany is sending its Marder vehicles, Biden and Scholz said in a joint statement. Germany also will provide Ukraine a Patriot battery, the second headed to the country after the US said last month that it would send one of the powerful air defense systems. The US and Germany will send armored vehicles to Ukraine, a significant upgrade in firepower urgently sought by Zelensky, leaders of the two nations announced in a joint statement after Putin ordered his forces to cease fighting in Ukraine for 36 hours starting Friday at noon, Moscow time. Kyiv dismissed the move as a ploy. The Kremlin said Putin gave the order ahead of Russian Orthodox Christmas. It followed an appeal by the Patriarch of the Russian Church, which has close ties to the Kremlin. Ukrainian presidential aide Mikhailo Podolyak suggested the offer was hypocrisy and in remarks to reporters, called Putin's move purely a propaganda gesture also designed to buy time for under-pressure Kremlin troops. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan continued efforts to lay the ground for talks between Russia and Ukraine in a call with Ukraine's president after speaking earlier with Vladimir Putin earlier. Zelensky discussed his so-called peace formula, or preconditions to end the war, with Erdogan, he said in a tweet. The peace formula, presented during G20 summit in November, would see Russia leaving all of occupied territories in Ukraine as one of main conditions of ending the war. Belarus and Russia will undertake joint air force exercises as part of an ongoing build-up in combined military activities, the Belarusian Defense Ministry said on Telegram without elaborating. Moscow is continuing to boost its presence in its neighbor and ally by sending more soldiers and weapons, according to the statement. President Vladimir Putin visited Minsk on December 19 for the first time since 2019 for talks with top officials. Ukraine's economy contracted by some 30% last year on the devastation wrought by Russia's invasion, the economy ministry said. Its preliminary estimates for 2022 gave a range between 28.4% and 32.4%. The scope of the economy's plunge was less drastic than projections made at the beginning of the invasion last February, when some economists forecast a slump in gross domestic product on the order of 50%. The projection also beat the ministry's initial estimate of more than 33%. Calls for peace and negotiations in Ukraine should be supported by a unilateral ceasefire and a vision for a fair solution, Tayyip Erdogan told Russia's Putin in a call. The German chancellor has so far resisted calls to directly supply modern armor, arguing the policy must first be agreed to among European Union and NATO allies. But Markus Faber, a lawmaker with the Free Democrats Party, part of Scholz's three-way coalition, said Germany needs to change course. The co-governing Greens also signaled support for more deliveries. The longtime Putin ally is one of the most prominent supporters of his war. Prigozhin has about 50,000 personnel on the ground in Ukraine, including 40,000 convicts and 10,000 contractors, the U.S. said last month. Russia reported after Christmas that it had relocated long-range aviation, LRA, bomber jets to the nation's far east, in a likely general dispersal following to airstrikes on the Engels air base much closer to Ukraine, the UK Defense Ministry said. Kremlin forces will still be able to fire air-launched cruise missiles into Ukraine because the weapons have a 5,000 kilometers range, in addition to the flight range of the bombers, the UK said. Still, the move adds additional maintenance stress to the aircraft. Russian forces have damaged 1,189 cultural sites in Ukraine since February 24. Every third site, 446, is ruined, Ukraine's culture ministry said. The highest number of destroyed or damaged sites have been recorded in Donetsk, Kyiv, Kharkiv, Luhansk, Mykolaiv, Zaporizhia, Sumy, and Kherson oblasts. The real number of damaged cultural sites due to Russia's war is expected to be higher, as the current count does not include Russian-occupied territories or where hostilities are ongoing, the ministry said. In addition, UNESCO has verified damage to 231 sites as of December 23, including 102 religious sites, 18 museums, 81 buildings of historical and/or artistic significance, 19 monuments, and 11 libraries. Ukraine has dismissed as a trick a unilateral order by Russia for a 36-hour ceasefire, as US and German leaders say they are sending armored fighting vehicles in a boost for the Kyiv government. The US weapons package, to be announced on Friday, is expected to include about 50 Bradley fighting vehicles as part of security assistance totaling about $2.8 billion, $4.1 billion Australian dollars, US officials say. Germany would provide Marder infantry fighting vehicles, according to a joint statement on Thursday from Biden and Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Both countries agreed to train Ukrainian soldiers on how to use them, it said. Germany would also supply a Patriot air defense battery to Ukraine, which has scored some battlefield successes since Russian forces invaded last February but has asked allies for heavier weapons. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky rejected out of hand a Russian order for a truce over Russian Orthodox Christmas starting at noon on Friday and ending at midnight on Saturday. He said it was a trick to halt the progress of Ukraine's forces in the eastern Donbass region and bring in more of Moscow's forces. Russia's Orthodox Church observes Christmas on January 7. Ukraine's main Orthodox Church has been recognized as independent by the church hierarchy since 2019 and rejects any notion of allegiance to the Moscow Patriarch. Many Ukrainian believers have shifted their calendar to celebrate Christmas on December 25 as in the West. Zelensky, pointedly speaking in Russian and not Ukrainian, said that ending the war meant ending your country's aggression. And the war will end either when your soldiers leave or we throw them out. Dmitry Polyansky, head of Russia's permanent mission to the United Nations, wrote on Twitter that Ukraine's reaction was, "One more reminder with whom we are fighting in Ukraine, ruthless nationalist criminals who have no respect for sacred things." Putin told Erdogan separately on Thursday that Russia was open to dialogue over Ukraine but that Kyiv would have to accept the loss of territories claimed by Russia, the Kremlin said. The war, described by Putin as a special military operation to protect his country's security, has displaced millions, killed thousands of civilians and left Ukrainian cities, towns, and villages in ruins. Russian President Vladimir Putin on Thursday ordered a 36-hour ceasefire in Ukraine over Orthodox Christmas, the first major truce of the more than 10-month-long war that has killed tens of thousands and devastated swathes of Ukraine. Putin ordered the ceasefire to begin on January 6, the Kremlin said. Many Orthodox Christians, including those living in Russia and Ukraine, celebrate Christmas on January 6 to 7. Patriarch Kirill of Moscow called earlier on Thursday for both sides of the war in Ukraine to observe a Christmas truce. Taking into account the appeal of His Holiness Patriarch Kirill, I instruct the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation to introduce a ceasefire regime along the entire line of contact of the parties in Ukraine from 12:00 on January 6, 2023 to midnight on January 7, 2023, Putin said in the order. Ukraine earlier dismissed Kirill's appeal, though there was no immediate reaction to Putin's ceasefire announcement. A senior aide to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, Mikhailo Podolyak, cast the Russian Orthodox Church as a war propagandist that had incited the mass murder of Ukrainians and the militarization of Russia. The United Nations announced Thursday it is disbanding a fact-finding mission requested by Russia and Ukraine to investigate the killings at a prison in eastern Ukraine controlled by Moscow-backed separatists that the warring nations accuse each other of carrying out. Russia claimed that Ukraine's military used US-supplied rocket launchers to strike the prison in Olenivka, a settlement controlled by the Moscow-backed Donetsk People's Republic, on July 29. Separatist authorities and Russian officials said the attack killed 53 Ukrainian POWs and wounded another 75. The Ukrainian military denied making any rocket or artillery strikes in Olenivka. In August, the intelligence arm of the Ukrainian Defense Ministry said it had evidence that local Kremlin-backed separatists colluded with the Russian FSB, the KGB's main successor agency, and the Russian mercenary group Wagner to mine the barak before using a flammable substance, which led to the rapid spread of fire in the room. The Ukrainian POWs at the Donetsk prison included troops captured during the fall of Mariupol. They spent months holed up with civilians at the giant Azovstal steel mill in the southern port city. Their resistance during a relentless Russian bombardment became a symbol of Ukrainian defiance against Russia's aggression. More than 2,400 soldiers from the Azov Regiment of the Ukrainian National Guard and other military units gave up their fight and surrendered under orders from Ukraine's military in May. Ukraine's defense ministry said on August 3 that Ukrainian captives at the prison had been subject to bullying, physical humiliation, and psychological demoralization in an attempt to coerce them into starring in pro-Russian propaganda videos. Secretary-General Guterres reiterated his call for the protection of prisoners of war as required under international humanitarian and human rights law, Dujarric said. President Vladimir Putin told Turkey's Tayyip Erdogan on Thursday that Russia was open to dialogue over Ukraine but that Kyiv would have to accept the loss of territories claimed by Russia, the Kremlin said. Putin also acknowledged the destructive role of the West, pumping weapons into Kyiv, providing information and guidance, the Kremlin said. The presidents also discussed a number of energy issues, including the creation of a gas hub in Turkey and the construction of the Akuya nuclear power plant, Kremlin said. Erdogan and the Russian president have spoken repeatedly since Russian forces invaded Ukraine in February. Turkey acted as mediator alongside the United Nations to set up a deal allowing grain exports from Ukrainian ports. According to the Kremlin, Putin once again told Erdogan that all the barriers to Russian exports of food and fertilizers, which Russia sees as part of grain deal, should be lifted. The Kremlin-controlled news agency RIA Novosti reported Gundayev's proposal in a posting on the Telegram Messenger on January 5. In particular, Gundayev called for the Christmas truce to last from 12 p.m. on January 6 to midnight on January 7 for 36 hours. Mikhailo Podolyak, an advisor to the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, said the proposal from the Kremlin regime henchmen was cynical and propaganda. After the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, Gundayev supported Russia's aggression and blessed its military's killing of Ukrainians. For example, in April 2022, during the service in the Russian Armed Forces Church, he praised Russian soldiers and questioned the independence of Ukraine. In September, during a Sunday sermon, he declared that a Russian soldier's death in the war with Ukraine washes away all sins. He went on to compare mobilized Russians to Jesus Christ. The Kremlin announced on December 14 that it had not received any proposals from the Ukrainian side after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called on Moscow to withdraw Russian troops by Christmas. In an address to the G7 leaders on December 12, the Ukrainian president said the withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukraine would ensure there was a stable ceasefire.